Hey guys, tonight we're going to embark on a truly epic, yet surprisingly sleepy, voyage across the chilly dark waters of history. Picture this. You're standing on the rugged, wind-swept shores of Scandinavia, the crisp, cold air biting at your cheeks, carrying the faint, bracing scent of pine and salt. You watch as a sleek, serpentine vessel, its single square sail billowing against a leaden sky, cuts through the waves, its dragon-headed prow seemingly breathing the mist. This, my friend, is the iconic image of the Viking longship, a symbol of adventure, of untamed spirit, of a certain kind of primal, fearless freedom that has captivated imaginations for centuries. You've probably seen them, haven't you? The horned helmet spoiler alert? Mostly a myth, the mighty axes, the towering, bearded figures bellowing war cries as they storm unsuspecting shores. Movies, TV shows, video games, they've painted a picture of a life lived on the edge, a saga of daring exploration, ruthless conquest, and legendary feasts in echoing mead halls. And yes, there's a kernel of truth to that thrilling narrative. The Vikings were, undeniably, a force to be reckoned with. But tonight, as you snuggle deeper under your blanket, we're going to gently, very gently, pull back the curtain on the awful truth about being involved in the Viking invasions. Because while the sagas sound cool, the reality, well, let's just say you probably would have absolutely hated it. You likely wouldn't have survived the first major bout of dysentery, let alone a winter voyage across the North Sea in a glorified wooden bathtub. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from tonight, and what time it is for you. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the deck of a longship, not the romanticized version with a heroically defiant figure at the prow, but the real thing. It's early morning, the kind of morning that makes your breath mist in the frigid air, even in late spring. The sea is a vast, slate-gray expanse, stretching endlessly towards a horizon that seems to promise nothing but more waves. The ship itself, while elegantly crafted, is surprisingly open. There are no cozy cabins here, no enclosed spaces for warmth or privacy. You are utterly exposed to the elements, the cold spray of the North Sea constantly washing over the low sides, chilling you to the bone. Every muscle in your body tenses against the rhythmic, relentless pitching and rolling of the vessel. This isn't a cruise, it's a constant, bone-jarring struggle against the vast indifference of nature. The wind howls, a mournful lament that drowns out all but the loudest shouts. Your clothes, thick wool and rough linen, are perpetually damp, clinging uncomfortably to your skin. The smell is a potent blend of salt, damp wood, unwashed bodies, yours included, because personal hygiene opportunities are practically non-existent on a long voyage. And the faint, unsettling aroma of fish guts. Forget your preferred brand of soap or deodorant. Your new signature scent is Eau de Damp Viking. It's enough to make you miss the simple luxury of a dry, clean pair of socks more than any mythical treasure. Life on board is a monotonous rhythm of rowing and sailing. When the wind is favorable, the single square sail, often brightly striped, pushes the ship forward with surprising speed. You're not actively steering, but you're constantly aware of the wind, the set of the sail, the creak of the mast. When the wind dies, or if you're navigating a narrow waterway, it's time to row. Hour after hour, you pull at a heavy oar, your muscles screaming in protest, your hands quickly blistering. The rhythmic groan of the oarlocks, the splash of the blades entering and leaving the water. It's a hypnotic, exhausting sound that becomes the soundtrack to your existence. There's no Spotify for entertainment, just the strained breathing of your shipmates and the occasional terse command from the steersman. Your workout routine is mandated by the unpredictable whims of the weather, and it's always leg day, arm day, and core day, all at once, for weeks on end. For weeks. Sleep is a luxury, not a given. You huddle with your shipmates on narrow wooden benches, wrapped in furs and woolen blankets, trying to snatch a few hours of uneasy rest amidst the constant motion, the cold, and the cramped conditions. There's no personal space here, no quiet corner to collect your thoughts. You are constantly in close proximity to dozens of other men, each with their own unique blend of body odor and snoring patterns. You'd probably find yourself dreaming of a simple, stable bed that doesn't constantly threaten to toss you overboard. Food is basic and monotonous. Dried meat or fish, hardtack, a kind of tough, dry biscuit, and perhaps some fermented beverages like weak beer or mead. Fresh water is precious and often rationed. You'd be constantly thirsty, constantly hungry, and probably constantly suffering from some form of digestive distress. Your diet lacks fresh fruits and vegetables, leading to a host of nutritional deficiencies that would make your modern body absolutely revolt. Scurvy, that delightful disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, would be a very real, very painful possibility, leading to bleeding gums, loose teeth, and extreme fatigue. Your dental floss would remain untouched, as you'd be too busy trying to keep your teeth in your mouth. Beyond the physical discomfort, there's the sheer, grinding boredom of long sea voyages. Days bleed into weeks, marked only by the shifting light of the sun and the moon. The horizon rarely changes. Conversation becomes sparse, exhausted by the elements. You might listen to sagas told by a skald, or pass the time carving intricate patterns into wood. But mostly, you're just enduring. The modern mind, accustomed to constant stimulation, would struggle with this forced introspection and monotony. You'd probably start inventing elaborate games with pebbles or trying to memorize the exact number of waves you see in an hour, just to stay sane. It's like a really, really long, boring flight, but with no movies, no legroom, and the constant threat of hypothermia. This isn't to say there wasn't a certain beauty to it. The vastness of the ocean, the raw power of nature, the silent majesty of the aurora borealis, if you were lucky enough to see it. But that beauty would be tempered by the constant, primal fear. The fear of storms that could swallow your ship whole, the fear of running out of water, the fear of unknown lands and unseen enemies. Every voyage was a gamble, a roll of the dice against the unforgiving elements. You are a small, fragile human in a vast, dangerous world. A common historical fact is that the iconic Viking longships, like the ones you're enduring this journey on, were incredibly versatile vessels. This is a testament to the advanced shipbuilding techniques of the Vikings, a unique and little-known detail for their time. They were shallow-drafted, allowing them to navigate far up rivers, yet robust enough to cross the open ocean. This allowed them to strike deep inland, far from the coast, catching monasteries and settlements completely by surprise. Imagine sailing up a peaceful, winding river, knowing you could hit a village miles from the sea, a strategic advantage that would make any modern military planner green with envy. The reasons why these voyages began are still a matter of academic debate. Historians still debate the primary motivations for the Viking Age expansion. Was it due to a growing population in Scandinavia outstripping available resources? Was it climate change making farming harder? Was it a quest for wealth and plunder? Or perhaps a desire for new trade routes and political power? For you, sailing on that longship, facing the freezing spray and endless monotony, the why might seem less important than the when will this end? You'd probably just wish for a good, warm meal and a dry place to sleep, far from the restless waves and the chilling promise of adventure. Because adventure in the Viking Age often just meant a long, uncomfortable trip followed by extreme violence. As the endless, rocking monotony of the sea voyage finally gives way to the distant sight of land, you might feel a flicker of anticipation. But this isn't the anticipation of a warm welcome or a cozy inn. Instead, It's a coiled, predatory stillness that descends upon your longship. The sails are lowered, the oars begin their rhythmic, almost silent cut through the water, and a chilling realization dawns on you. This isn't an arrival. It's an infiltration. Welcome to the other side of the Viking coin, the side of sudden, brutal terror. Imagine, if you will, being a humble coastal villager in early medieval Europe. You've just awoken, perhaps to the crow of a rooster or the gentle bleating of sheep. The morning mist hangs low over the fields, dampening the sounds of your awakening world. You step outside, perhaps to tend to your meager crops or draw water from the communal well. The air is cool and still, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the hearths of your neighbors. Life is simple, predictable, and utterly vulnerable. Your early warning system, maybe a dog barking, or a very, very sharp-eyed shepherd. No radar, no Coast Guard, just the quiet rhythm of the land. Then, a sound, almost imperceptible at first, slices through the morning quiet. A low, rhythmic thump, swish. Thump, swish on the water. It's too steady for fishing boats, too powerful for stray currents. Your eyes, squinting against the mist, strain towards the gray expanse of the sea. And then you see them. Not one, but a handful of sleek, low-slung vessels, their single sails furled, their prows, often carved into terrifying dragon heads, emerging silently from the fog. These are the longships, and their arrival is the visual embodiment of impending doom. There's no gentle knocking on the door. They just show up, unannounced, like a very unwelcome flash mob wielding sharp objects. The speed with which they land is horrifying. These ships are designed for it. With their shallow drafts, they can glide right up onto the sandy beach or even deep into the mouth of a river. The oarsmen, with a final, synchronized pull, beach the vessel with a soft thud. Before you can even properly register the sight, figures are leaping out, not scrambling, but pouring onto the shore with an almost unnatural swiftness. They are not encumbered by heavy armor initially. At least, many early raiders were relatively lightly armored, prioritizing speed and mobility. They are lean, agile, and seemingly bursting with a terrifying energy after weeks at sea. Their axes glint dully in the weak morning light, and then comes the sound. The initial silence of their approach is shattered by a guttural, terrifying roar, a collective battle cry that rips through the peaceful morning. This isn't just a shout, it's a primal, disorienting sound designed to instill immediate panic, to freeze your blood. It's meant to break any semblance of organized resistance before it even begins. Your heart leaps into your throat, a cold knot of dread twisting in your stomach. The air, which moments ago smelled of wood smoke, now carries the acrid tang of fear and the promise of smoke from burning thatch. You turn to run, but your legs feel like lead. The villagers around you are in chaos. Screams erupt. Children cry. Mothers clutch their babes. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. The Vikings, having burst from the ships, are already fanning out, moving with a disciplined ferocity that leaves no time for thought. They are after one thing: plunder, and they are efficient. They don't waste time on elaborate siege engines or prolonged negotiations. Their tactic is pure shock and awe, a surgical strike designed to overwhelm, terrorize, and strip valuable resources before any organized defense can be mounted. It's like a corporate raiding party, but with actual axes instead of hostile takeover bids. The common historical fact is that the first recorded Viking raid in England, and often cited as the true start of the Viking Age, occurred in 793 AD at the monastery of Lindisfarne on the northeast coast. This event sent shockwaves across Christian Europe because monasteries were considered sacred, inviolable spaces. The very idea of attacking a holy site and slaughtering monks was seen as an unspeakable act of barbarity, highlighting the terrifying nature of these new invaders who seemingly respected no boundaries. The psychological impact of their appearance was a weapon in itself. Unlike the more traditional, heavily armored warriors seen in European warfare, early Viking raiders often arrived looking different, perhaps less uniform, their clothing practical rather than ceremonial, but it was their ferocity, their speed, and their seemingly indiscriminate violence that truly struck terror into the hearts of the populace. A unique detail often overlooked is how quickly they could transition from sailors to warriors. Their longships were designed so that the oars could quickly be shipped removed, and the warriors could grab their weapons, ready to fight within moments of landing. There was no lengthy disembarkation process. They were optimized for lightning-fast incursions. Imagine being a medieval security guard, and your intruders can literally jump out of their vehicles and be on you before you can even radio for backup. The academic debate frequently discusses whether these early Viking raids were purely opportunistic attacks driven by individual greed or if there was a more coordinated, pre-planned strategy, perhaps even some level of centralized leadership behind them. While the initial raids might have been smaller, independent ventures, the speed, scale, and repeated nature of subsequent attacks suggest at least a developing understanding of effective raiding strategies. For you, the terrified villager, the academic nuances wouldn't matter. All you'd see were the terrifying figures bursting from the sea mist, their axes raised, and your peaceful world shattering around you. The sound of their guttural shouts, the metallic ring of their weapons, and the desperate screams of your neighbors would echo in your ears long after they'd vanished back into the mist, leaving only smoke and ruins in their wake. And as they disappeared, leaving you trembling, you'd understand that the sea, once a source of trade and connection, had become a terrifying highway for destruction. As the last echoes of the panic-stricken coastal village fade behind your longship, your attention, now sharpened by the thrill of the chase and the promise of plunder, shifts to the horizon, not towards another bustling market town, but towards a different kind of target, one that shimmered with a quiet, almost undefended wealth, the isolated monastery. For you, the Viking raider, these bastions of piety and learning were less about spiritual sanctity and more about strategically ripe pickings, tempting like low-hanging fruit on a very vulnerable branch. Imagine yourself as a monk in early medieval Europe. Your life is one of quiet devotion, of prayer, study, and manual labor. Your days are marked by the ringing of bells, calling you to matins, lauds, and vespers. The air in your scriptorium, the copying room, smells of old parchment, beeswax, and the faint, earthy scent of herbs from your medicinal garden. Your monastery, often nestled in a peaceful valley or perched on a remote island, is a self-sufficient world, a haven of tranquility. You live by the Benedictine rule, valuing solitude, community, and scholarship. Your security system is primarily divine faith, and perhaps a low stone wall meant more for keeping out livestock than armed invaders. These monasteries, in their fervent dedication to God, had inadvertently accumulated vast riches, not just in spiritual merit, but in tangible wealth. Gifts from kings and nobles, donations from pious pilgrims, tithes from surrounding lands, all flowed into these sacred coffers. They housed not just relics of saints, but intricate chalices of pure gold, crosses adorned with precious jewels, reliquaries shimmering with silver, and ornate crucifixes that dazzled the eye. Libraries brimmed with illuminated manuscripts, their covers sometimes encrusted with gold and gemstones, their pages filled with the painstaking work of generations of scribes. They even had finely woven vestments, gold-embroidered altar cloths, and a store of basic necessities that rivaled any local lord's pantry. Your financial advisor would tell you this was essentially an unaudited, incredibly liquid asset, ripe for the taking. You, observing from your longship, understand this perfectly. These places are isolated, rarely fortified. The inhabitants are men of God, not warriors. Their defenses are prayers, not swords. You approach under the cover of mist, or just before dawn, with the same chilling efficiency that you used on the coastal villages. The longship glides silently into a secluded cove or up a tranquil river, its dragon prow cutting through the morning stillness. The soft thud as the keel kisses the shore is the only sound before the rapid thud of your boots on the sand. As you burst through the flimsy gate, or scale the low wall, the contrast is stark. The peaceful chanting of the monks, perhaps just beginning their morning prayers, is abruptly replaced by the harsh, guttural shouts of your comrades. The air, which moments ago smelled of incense and aged parchment, is now filled with the acrid scent of fear, and soon, burning thatch as you make your presence undeniably felt. The initial terror on the monks' faces is palpable, a look of utter bewilderment, sacrilege, as if the very laws of heaven had been broken by your intrusion. They are utterly unprepared. There's no medieval SWAT team, no armed militia ready to respond. Just a few dozen aging men of peace, facing a wave of hardened warriors. It's like a peaceful retirement home suddenly being invaded by a heavily armed biker gang. Your mission, however, is not chaotic destruction, at least not initially. It's precise plunder. You move with a practiced eye, knowing exactly what to look for. You head straight for the church, the treasury, the sacristy. You quickly identify the altar, the reliquaries, the chalices. The gleam of gold and silver in the flickering torchlight or the first rays of the sun is your beacon. You don't care about the saint whose bone is encased in that jeweled casket. You care about the gold of the casket itself. This is where a unique detail of the Viking approach comes in their pragmatic, almost indifferent, attitude towards Christian religious symbolism. While the locals might have seen a jeweled cross as an object of immense spiritual power, you saw it as raw material. Gold to be melted down, jewels to be pried out and traded. A gilded Bible might be beautiful, but the true value was in its precious metals, not its holy words. It's like a modern art collector valuing the frame more than the masterpiece within. You might hear the desperate cries of monks, perhaps clutching their holy books or attempting to shield sacred objects. Some might be captured, not out of malice, but for ransom or sale into slavery, another valuable commodity. You toss aside heavy, ornate vestments, not because you disdain them, but because they hold little material value compared to the gold plate underneath. The scriptorium, that hallowed hall of knowledge, becomes a scene of quiet desecration as scrolls are scattered, pages ripped, and the meticulous work of centuries is thrown to the wind. You're not trying to erase history, you're just trying to get to the loot. As the morning progresses, and your longships begin to fill with the spoils, the peaceful monastic grounds transform into a scene of methodical destruction. Buildings might be set ablaze, not always out of wanton cruelty, but to deny future refuge or simply to signal your departure and leave a lasting impression of terror. The smell of burning wood and scorched parchment replaces the aroma of piety. The bells, which once chimed calls to prayer, might now lie smashed on the ground, or even be carried off as trophies. The academic debate often centers on the extent of religious motivation in these early Viking raids. Were they specifically anti-Christian, fueled by pagan zeal, or were they simply pragmatic opportunists targeting wealth wherever it was found, regardless of its sanctity? While the sacrilege was undeniable from a Christian perspective, for you, the Viking, it was probably less about blasphemy and more about efficiency. These places were rich, undefended, and easy targets. The holy aspect was irrelevant. The gold aspect was everything. And as you push off from the shore, the heavy silence of the ruined monastery behind you, the weight of the plundered gold in your longship feels far more comforting than any spiritual benediction. You're not here for salvation. You're here for the riches. And these monasteries were practically begging to be relieved of their burdens. As the initial shock waves of your terrifying coastal raids began to reverberate across Europe, a subtle but profound shift began to take hold. The quick, brutal smash-and-grab operations, while thrilling in their immediacy and lucrative in their plunder, simply weren't sustainable as a long-term strategy. You couldn't just keep showing up, taking everything, and disappearing. At some point, you'd run out of undefended monasteries, or the locals would get wise and build bigger walls. So, slowly, inexorably, your objectives began to change. From being mere raiders, you, the Viking, would begin to morph into something far more complex: a settler, an administrator, and eventually, a ruler, establishing new kingdoms that would reshape the map of medieval Europe. Imagine the conversation, perhaps around a crackling fire in a temporary winter camp on a foreign shore. The brutal autumn winds have begun to bite, and the thought of another long, freezing voyage back to Scandinavia, only to return next spring, starts to lose its appeal. The land here, though initially hostile, is fertile. The rivers are rich with fish. The local villages, though diminished, still hold promise. Why keep making the perilous journey when you can just stay? This pragmatic realization was often the spark that ignited the transition from seasonal raiding to permanent occupation. It's like deciding your vacation spot is so good. You just move in and claim it. Your vacation home now comes with a mandatory conquer and defend clause. You begin by establishing more permanent winter camps. These weren't just temporary shelters. They were fortified strongholds, often built on strategic river bends or islands, allowing for easy access to both land and sea. You'd oversee the construction of sturdy longhouses, workshops for your smiths, and perhaps even rudimentary defenses. The air, which once only carried the scent of raid smoke, now begins to smell of freshly cut timber, the clang of hammers on stone, and the low hum of daily life slowly taking root. These winter camps would gradually swell, attracting more Vikings from Scandinavia, and eventually, even some of the local populations. Drawn by the promise of protection or economic opportunity, the process of settlement and rule was rarely, if ever, entirely peaceful. It involved a complex dance of violence, negotiation, and adaptation. You might conquer a territory outright, driving out the local lords and claiming the land by force. Or, perhaps more commonly, you might extort tribute from a local ruler, the infamous Danegeld, a payment of silver to avoid further raids. This, a common historical fact, effectively turned fear into a continuous revenue stream. But once you were paid, you often stayed, demanding more, or slowly integrating into the existing power structure. Imagine running a protection racket that eventually morphs into a full-blown government. One of the most significant examples of this evolution is the Danelaw in England. You would have witnessed it firsthand. After years of relentless raiding, the Great Heathen Army, which we'll discuss more later, eventually conquered vast swaths of Anglo-Saxon England. Instead of simply plundering and leaving, they began to settle. You'd see your fellow Vikings, once fearsome warriors, transforming into farmers, craftsmen, and even merchants. They'd clear land, build villages, and establish towns. The very names of places, like those ending in "by," like Derby or Grimsby, silently record this profound shift in ownership and culture. It's like your biker gang deciding to open a chain of profitable organic farms. This transition from raider to ruler was often marked by an uneasy coexistence with the conquered populations. You'd find yourself dealing with Anglo-Saxon farmers, Irish monks, or Frankish counts, not just as victims, but as subjects or neighbors. Laws had to be established, disputes settled, and taxes collected. You, the Viking warrior, would find yourself grappling with the mundane realities of governance. It's a unique, little-known detail that Viking law, which was based on oral tradition and communal assemblies things, often introduced new legal concepts to the lands they settled. such as different forms of land tenure or the use of juries, which would later influence common law in England. So, not only did they bring axes, they also brought legal reform. Beyond England, you'd see similar patterns emerge. In Ireland, Viking longships transformed the landscape by establishing fortified port towns like Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These weren't just raiding bases, they became thriving centers of trade, linking Scandinavia with the British Isles and beyond. You might spend your days overseeing the bustling markets, exchanging furs and timber for silver and slaves, rather than leading a charge on a monastery. The smells of fish, spices, and exotic goods would mix with the familiar scent of wood smoke, a testament to your newfound mercantile endeavors. Further east, in what would become Russia, you'd participate in the establishment of the Rus states. Your people, the Norsemen, navigated the vast river systems, forging trade routes from the Baltic to the Byzantine Empire. They established trading posts that grew into powerful cities like Novgorod and Kiev. Here, the raider identity softened even further, blending with the local Slavic populations. You might find yourself arguing over tariffs and trade agreements with local princes, rather than brandishing your axe. The political acumen required for this kind of sustained influence was a far cry from the raw, unthinking violence of the early raids. The long-term impact of this shift from raiding to settlement was immense. It wasn't just about changing who owned the land. It was about changing the very fabric of society. New languages began to blend, new customs to emerge. The fear you once instilled would slowly morph into a grudging respect, or at least a cautious tolerance. As the lines between invader and settler blurred, you were no longer just the terrifying stranger from the sea, you were the lord of the manor, the mayor of the town, the leader of a burgeoning kingdom. It's like graduating from being a notorious pirate to becoming the CEO of a highly profitable shipping company. The academic debate continues to explore the degree of violence versus peaceful integration in Viking settlement areas. Were these new kingdoms established primarily through brutal conquest and subjugation, or was there a more gradual process of cultural assimilation, intermarriage, and mutual benefit, especially as local rulers recognized the Vikings' military and economic power? For you, living through it, it was probably a messy, often brutal blend of both. A constant negotiation between the axe and the plowshare. As the sun set on your newly acquired territory, you'd realize that the life of a ruler, even a Viking one, involves a lot more paperwork and a lot less pillaging than the sagas ever let on. As the initial dust of conquest and the raw excitement of establishing new territories slowly settle, you, the Viking, find yourself facing a new kind of challenge: the tedious, often uncomfortable, yet surprisingly organized reality of life under Viking law. Forget the endless, wild freedom of the sea. You're now bound by new rules, new obligations, and the sometimes stifling realities of building a settled society. It's like graduating from a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled startup to managing a surprisingly bureaucratic and very cold medieval corporation. Your day doesn't begin with the sound of breaking monastery gates, but with the familiar, earthy smell of wood smoke clinging to the damp air inside your longhouse. These communal dwellings, while providing shelter from the biting Scandinavian or newly acquired British-Irish winds, are far from private paradises. Imagine sharing a single, large, smoky room with your entire extended family, and sometimes even a few farm animals during the harshest winter months. The air is thick with the scent of damp wool, cooking fires, unwashed bodies, yes. Even in Viking settlements, daily showers weren't a thing, and the earthy aroma of stored provisions. Your personal space is measured in inches, not feet, and privacy is a concept best left to your dreams. You'd probably long for the blissful solitude of a modern apartment, even if it meant paying rent. The backbone of this new life, for most, is farming. Your hands, once accustomed to the rough feel of an oar or the smooth grip of an axe, are now calloused from gripping a plow handle or scythe. You're working the land, battling the unpredictable elements, just like the locals you might have once raided. The cycle of seasons dictates your life: spring planting, summer tending, autumn harvest, and the long, dark, bone-chilling winter spent largely indoors, repairing tools, weaving textiles, and desperately trying to stay warm. It's hard, unrelenting physical labor, where a bad harvest means real hunger, not just a smaller grocery bill. Your work-life balance is simply work, sleep, work, more work. But living in these new territories isn't just about farming. It's about navigating a new social and legal landscape. The traditional Viking system of law, a common historical fact, revolved around the Thing or Thingvellir in Iceland, an open-air assembly where free men would gather to discuss disputes, enact laws, and make judgments. You might find yourself trekking for days, perhaps to a place like Jorvik, modern-day York in England, or Dublin, to participate in the local Thing. Imagine sitting in the biting cold, surrounded by hundreds of other armed freemen, listening to a law speaker recite ancient laws from memory, their voice echoing across the sparse landscape. It's a surprisingly democratic yet incredibly slow and often tense form of justice. The cases brought before the Thing could range from land disputes and theft to accusations of murder. Justice wasn't about jails as we know them, but about retribution, honor, and compensation. This is where a unique, little-known detail comes in: the system of Wergild, literally man price. Instead of endless blood feuds for every killing, a specific monetary value, often paid in silver, was assigned to every individual based on their social status. If you killed a freeman, you owed his family a certain amount of silver, injured someone, pay for their healing and lost labor. This surprisingly sophisticated system aimed to prevent cyclical violence by providing a structured way to compensate victims and their families. It's like a medieval insurance policy, but instead of premiums, you pay with your life or your silver. You'd probably spend more time calculating Wergild than your modern equivalent spends on tax returns. Your place in this society is clear, but fluid. You might be a jarl, an earl, or chieftain, wielding significant power and owning much land and many thrall slaves. Or you might be a carl, a freeman, a farmer or craftsman, owning your own land, possessing rights, and obligated to attend the Thing. At the bottom are the thralls, unfortunate individuals captured in raids or born into servitude. This social structure, while seemingly rigid, allowed for some mobility. A successful warrior could become wealthy. A shrewd trader could amass influence. But your honor, your reputation, and your willingness to defend them were paramount. A perceived insult could lead to a challenge, and a public assembly might demand you defend your name, perhaps even with a duel. The urban centers like Jorvik, York, or Dublin, once conquered, quickly transformed into bustling trading hubs. You'd find yourself walking through narrow, muddy streets, the air alive with the cacophony of a thriving market. The smell of fish, leather, and wood smoke would mix with the exotic aromas of spices and silks brought from distant lands. You'd see merchants from various cultures: Anglo-Saxons, Irish, Frisians, and fellow Norsemen, bartering for furs, timber, amber, and even slaves. This economic shift, from pure plunder to organized commerce, meant a more stable, albeit equally demanding, daily life. Your days might be spent haggling over prices, supervising your warehouses, or repairing your trade vessel, rather than sharpening your axe for the next raid. It's like trading in your battle armor for a ledger book. The integration of Viking and native cultures was a messy, ongoing process. You'd hear new words creeping into your Norse tongue, and you'd pick up local customs. Marriages between Viking settlers and local women were common, blurring the lines of ethnicity and forging new identities. But tensions remained. The conquered populations often resented the imposition of Viking rule, and you'd have to remain vigilant against localized rebellions or attempts to undermine your authority. It's like living in a perpetually uneasy truce, where your neighbors might be your farmers today and plotting your overthrow tomorrow. The academic debate frequently explores the degree to which Viking law and social structures were truly democratic, or if they were predominantly influenced by the powerful chieftains and landowners, making the thing more of a formality than true popular rule, and how much the native populations truly integrated versus being simply subjugated and culturally assimilated under duress. For you, living under these laws, the daily reality was a constant negotiation between communal decision-making and the brute force that ultimately backed all authority. As the longhouse fire crackles, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, you'd drift off to sleep, perhaps dreaming of a world where justice was less about monetary compensation for a broken arm and more about simply not having your arm broken in the first place. As your life settles into the rhythms of the thing and the endless, demanding cycle of farming or trading, a new kind of drumbeat begins to echo across the land, one that makes the earlier, sharp thud of a lone longship hitting the beach seem like a distant, quaint memory. This isn't just another small raiding party, nor is it merely a group of settlers digging in for the winter. What emerges now is a force of truly terrifying scale and ambition, a relentless, organized military might that would reshape the very map of Europe, the Great Heathen Army. Imagine the sheer, terrifying spectacle of it. If you're a local Anglo-Saxon, you'd first hear the rumors, whispers carried on the wind, growing louder, more frantic, with each passing day. Not just a handful of longships, but hundreds. Not a few score warriors, but thousands upon thousands, converging from across the disparate Viking strongholds in England and even fresh arrivals from Scandinavia. This is a common historical fact: the Great Heathen Army, which landed in East Anglia in 865 AD, marked a profound shift in Viking strategy, moving beyond mere seasonal raids to systematic conquest and occupation. This wasn't just a raiding party. This was an invading army, here to stay. And it consumed everything in its path. Your early warning system now needs to scan the entire horizon, not just the nearest coastline. If you're a Viking, a part of this colossal force, you feel the raw power of numbers. The individualistic freedom of the early raider is replaced by a grinding, almost overwhelming sense of discipline. You march in a vast, endless column, stretching for miles across the Anglo-Saxon countryside. The dust kicked up by thousands of marching feet and hundreds of acquired horses, yes. Vikings learned to ride, often acquiring horses locally for increased mobility, effectively becoming mounted infantry for quick travel and raiding. Though not traditional cavalry for shock charges would rise in thick, ochre clouds, obscuring the sun. The air is alive with the cacophony of a vast army on the move, the creak of leather, the clinking of mail, the rhythmic tramp of boots, the low murmur of thousands of voices, interspersed with the shouted commands of your leaders. Halfdan, Ivar the Boneless, Ubba, and others. It's a terrifying, magnificent machine, and you are just one cog in its brutal gears. The landscape itself suffers. As you move through the conquered or threatened territories, you witness the devastation firsthand. Villages, once bustling with life, are now smoldering ruins. Their thatch roofs collapsed, their wooden walls charred. Fields, once ripe with harvest, are trampled into muddy wastes by the sheer weight of your marching force. What isn't consumed by your army is often destroyed. A scorched earth policy designed to deny resources to any pursuing enemy. This isn't just about taking plunder, it's about breaking the enemy's ability to resist, about systematic subjugation. It's like your mobile operations base is literally an entire hungry city on the move, consuming everything in its path and leaving an environmental disaster in its wake. When winter approaches, this enormous army doesn't just retreat. No, that would be too simple. Instead, you participate in the rapid construction of fortified winter camps. These aren't crude, temporary shelters like those of earlier raiding parties. This is a unique, little-known detail. The Vikings of the Great Heathen Army quickly became masters of sophisticated military engineering. You'd find yourself digging deep ditches, raising earthen ramparts, and sometimes even building complex D-shaped forts with internal streets and barracks, like those discovered at Repton or Torksey. Imagine the sheer speed with which thousands of men, wielding shovels and axes, could transform a piece of open ground into a formidable fortress, designed to withstand a siege. These camps were designed not just for shelter, but as secure bases from which to launch spring offensives, holding conquered territory and projecting power throughout the winter. The tactics you employ are also more sophisticated. No longer just lightning raids, you engage in sustained sieges, patiently starving out towns and cities. You face Anglo-Saxon armies in pitched battles, not just skirmishes. Your preferred tactic, the shield wall, is an imposing sight and a formidable defense. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, your shields interlocked, forming an impenetrable barrier of wood and iron. You feel the collective strength, the rhythmic grunt of the men, the forest of spears bristling forward. When you advance, it's a slow, terrifying push, a living battering ram designed to crush any line it meets. It's less like a chaotic brawl and more like a very heavy, very angry moving brick wall. For the Anglo-Saxons, facing this juggernaut was a nightmare. Their existing kingdoms crumbled one by one. Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, they all fell under the Viking heel. You, as a defender, would witness the utter despair as your king either fled, was killed, or worse, was forced to pay the humiliating Danegeld, knowing it was merely a temporary reprieve. The sheer size of the army made it almost impossible to counter effectively. Raising a large enough force, feeding it, and moving it quickly enough to intercept the Vikings was a logistical feat that often proved beyond the capabilities of the fragmented Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The academic debate continues to question the precise size of the great heathen army. Contemporary accounts from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle often exaggerate. Speaking of innumerable hosts, historians debate whether it was truly a single, cohesive force under centralized command, or a shifting coalition of powerful, independent war bands that frequently acted in concert for strategic goals. For you, whether you were a Viking within its ranks or an unfortunate local staring at its approach, the academic distinctions wouldn't matter. All you would see and feel was the overwhelming, relentless might of a force that seemed unstoppable, consuming kingdoms and reshaping destinies with every thundering step. You'd probably fall asleep to the distant, unsettling sounds of a massive, temporary city of warriors, knowing that tomorrow, the conquest would continue, as the dust clouds of the great heathen army recede, leaving behind a trail of desolation and despair. You, as a resident of the threatened lands, perhaps a worried noble, a bishop trembling in your besieged cathedral, or a weary soldier on a forced march, find yourself thrust into the epicenter of an existential struggle. The age of sporadic Viking raids is long past. Now, entire kingdoms are falling, and the very fabric of your society is being torn asunder. This is the era where kings, facing relentless Viking power, were forced into desperate acts of resistance and complex alliances, just to survive. Imagine the atmosphere in the royal court. The grand halls, usually alive with the laughter of courtiers and the clink of chalices, are now hushed, filled only with the anxious murmurs of advisors and the frantic scratching of scribes recording losses. Messengers, mud-splattered and exhausted, arrive daily with grim tidings: Northumbria has fallen. Mercia is in disarray. East Anglia's king is slain. The map on the table is no longer a symbol of your domain, but a stark, terrifying illustration of shrinking territory, as Viking influence spreads like an unstoppable disease. The chilling reality of total annihilation hangs heavy in the air. Your daily briefing now involves trying to calculate how many more days you have before your own castle is under siege. Your initial responses. You realize with hindsight, were almost laughably inadequate. Raising a feared local levy of farmers and craftsmen to meet a professional, battle-hardened Viking force was like bringing a butter knife to a sword fight. They were quicker, more brutal, and their shield walls were an impenetrable force that shattered your disorganized ranks. You'd witness the humiliating sight of your own proud warriors fleeing, or worse, being cut down as your kingdom's power crumbled. The very concept of a unified defense seemed impossible when every regional lord was busy nursing old feuds or protecting their own immediate lands. But amidst this chaos, leaders began to emerge, figures who understood that the old ways would no longer suffice. You might find yourself pledging fealty or offering counsel to a king who was not just a warrior, but a strategic genius. Think of Alfred the Great of Wessex, a name that would echo through history. You would see firsthand his tireless, desperate efforts to not just fight, but adapt. He wasn't just reacting. He was rethinking the very foundations of defense. Your previous defensive strategy of "hope they don't come here" was replaced by a rigid, planned network. One of the most profound adaptations was the burr system. This is a unique, little-known detail. Alfred began constructing a network of fortified towns, or burrs, across Wessex. Imagine the sheer effort. You would be called upon, perhaps as a common man or a skilled laborer, to help dig massive ditches, raise towering earthen ramparts, and erect sturdy wooden palisades around existing settlements. The air would be filled with the sounds of thousands of shovels hitting earth, the rhythmic thud of mallets driving stakes, and the shouting of overseers. These burrs weren't just forts. They were designed to be mutually supporting strongholds, strategically placed so that no part of the kingdom was more than a day's ride from a protected refuge. They became centers of trade, administration, and, crucially, military garrisons. It was essentially turning your entire kingdom into a giant, interconnected fortress, a medieval version of Fortress America against airborne threats. Beyond these fortifications, you'd participate in the reform of military service. Instead of just seasonal levies, Alfred began organizing a more effective fighting force, training men in shifts so that the kingdom always had a standing army ready to respond, while still allowing farmers to tend their fields. You'd feel the difference in the discipline, the more organized movements, the growing confidence as your own forces learned to meet the Viking shield wall with their own, the endless, dusty marches, the tension before battle, the exhaustion of constant vigilance. These were the new rhythms of your military life. But now, there was a glimmer of hope, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Diplomacy, too, became a double-edged sword. You'd witness the agonizing decision to pay the Danegeld, that infamous tribute paid to the Vikings. The king would explain, with a grim set to his jaw, that this was not a surrender, but a desperate measure to buy time. You'd see the church plate melted down, the family heirlooms sold, the very fabric of society strained to raise the immense sums of silver. The hope, a fragile thing, was that the Vikings would take the money and leave. The grim reality, as you'd often learn, was that it frequently only provided them with the resources to fund their next, even larger invasion. This is where the academic debate often scrutinizes the true effectiveness of Danegeld as a long-term strategy. Did it genuinely buy valuable time for kingdoms to regroup and build defenses? Or did it simply empower the Vikings further by providing them with the resources they needed for more ambitious campaigns? For you, the common subject, it felt like an endless cycle of extortion. And then there were the alliances, often formed out of pure necessity. The enemy of your enemy, sometimes, became your reluctant friend. You might witness the uneasy truce between your king and a rival ruler, both forced to set aside generations of animosity to face the common existential threat of the great heathen army. Marriages were arranged, treaties signed, and promises made, all against a backdrop of deep-seated mistrust. Imagine having to ride into battle alongside men you would normally consider sworn enemies, simply because a bigger, nastier enemy was trying to burn everyone's house down. It was less about camaraderie and more about grim, mutually assured survival. So, as the bells of the newly fortified burrs began to peal, not in warning, but in a defiant symbol of resistance, you'd feel a subtle shift. The overwhelming dread of the great heathen army never fully vanished, but it was now tempered by a growing sense of resilience, of organization, of an Anglo-Saxon spirit learning to fight back. The Viking Age, you realize, isn't just a story of invaders. It's also a story of the desperate, ingenious, and often painful efforts of those who resisted, adapting and evolving their own kingdoms to face the terrifying, relentless might of a new enemy. As you lay your head down, the lingering smell of wood smoke in the air, you'd sleep with the quiet, uneasy understanding that the fight for survival was far from over. As the relentless cycle of raid and resistance defines your life in Western Europe, a different kind of Viking saga unfolds, stretching far across the vast forested plains and mighty river systems of Eastern Europe. You, the Viking, are now venturing onto less trodden paths, driven not just by the prospect of quick plunder, but by the irresistible allure of trade, tribute, and the shimmering wealth of the Byzantine Empire. This is the Vikings' lesser-known, yet incredibly impactful journey east, where axes might still be drawn, but a merchant's scale often held more weight than a warrior's shield. Imagine leaving the familiar, choppy waters of the North Sea behind. Instead, your longship, perhaps slightly modified for river travel, glides into the wide, slow-moving currents of vast Eastern European rivers. Like the Volga or the Dnieper, the landscape transforms around you. Gone are the open coastlines and rolling hills of England. Here, endless, dark pine forests stretch as far as the eye can see, their scent a constant, woody presence in the air. The sounds are different too, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an unknown bird, and the constant rhythmic chant of your oarsmen as they push against the current. This is a journey defined by waterways, a labyrinth of interconnected rivers and lakes that stretch from the Baltic Sea all the way south to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Your purpose here is fundamentally different. While raiding is still an option, and indeed, often a part of the initial negotiation, the primary driver is commerce. You are a merchant warrior. A rus, a term derived from the Norse rovsmen, meaning rowers or men who row, plying these immense river highways. You establish trading posts, small fortified settlements that gradually grow into bustling towns and, eventually, major cities like Novgorod and Kiev. The initial interactions with the local Slavic and Finnic peoples might involve coercion and tribute, but a symbiotic relationship quickly emerges. You offer protection, organization, and access to distant markets. They offer furs, honey, wax, and slaves, valuable commodities that fuel your long-distance trade networks. It's like setting up a highly lucrative, slightly intimidating, ancient version of an Amazon distribution center in the middle of nowhere. The challenges of this eastern route are unique. You'll encounter mighty rapids, where your longship must be lightened and dragged overland. A brutal process known as portaging. Imagine heaving a heavy wooden vessel over logs and rough terrain, every muscle straining, your breath rasping in the cold air. Then, you're back on the water, only to face potentially hostile tribes or rival trading groups. Your axe is still a tool of negotiation, but now it shares space with balance scales and bolts of fine cloth. The cacophony of a bustling market, filled with the chatter of dozens of languages and the clink of exotic coins, replaces the roar of battle. Your ultimate destination, for many of these eastern journeys, is the glittering, almost mythical city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Imagine arriving at its colossal walls, a sprawling metropolis far grander and more sophisticated than anything you've ever seen in the West. The air smells of spices, exotic perfumes, and the sheer concentrated wealth of an empire. This is where your furs, your amber, and your slaves are exchanged for the legendary silks of China, the fine spices of the East, intricate gold and silver work, and the coveted silver dirhams of the Islamic Caliphate, which flowed north via the Volga trade route. This is a common historical fact. Vast quantities of Islamic silver coins, known as dirhams, have been found in Viking hordes across Scandinavia, providing undeniable evidence of the massive scale of their eastern trade networks. You'd be more concerned with the purity of the silver in your payment than the purity of someone's soul. While trade is paramount, the Viking spirit of adventure and aggression still simmers. You might participate in raiding expeditions against Constantinople itself, though these were often unsuccessful against the city's formidable defenses. However, your military prowess is recognized. Many of your fellow Norsemen, and perhaps even you, would join the ranks of the Varangian Guard, the elite personal bodyguard of the Byzantine Emperor. This is where the contrasts are truly striking. You, the wild warrior from the cold north, now stand resplendent in Byzantine armor, guarding the holiest personage in the Christian East. Your brutal efficiency is harnessed by a highly bureaucratic, religiously devout empire. It's like a grizzled, unkempt biker suddenly becoming a perfectly polished bodyguard for a very eccentric billionaire. The smell of oil and sweat from the Longship is replaced by the rich perfume of the imperial palace, and the taste of salt on the wind by the delicate flavors of Byzantine cuisine. The impact of these eastern journeys is immense. You, the Rus, become a crucial link between Northern Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic Caliphate. Your trade routes contribute to a vast economic network, stretching across continents. You help lay the foundations for what would eventually become the early Russian states, blending Norse leadership with Slavic populations. The cultural exchange is profound. New words enter your vocabulary, new religious ideas. Orthodox Christianity begin to filter into your consciousness, and new social structures emerge. The academic debate often focuses on the precise origins of the Rus' state, how much was due to direct Norse influence and rule, versus how much was indigenous Slavic development that merely incorporated Norse elements. Historians also debate the extent to which the Varangian Guard retained their Norse identity over generations within the Byzantine court, or if they fully assimilated. For you, the Viking who traveled east, the answers to these debates might be less clear-cut. You would know that while the West saw the Viking as a purely destructive force, the East often saw a formidable trader, a reliable mercenary, and a crucial bridge between vastly different worlds. As you fall asleep, the faint jingle of silver dirhams in your pouch, and the distant sound of the Dnieper flowing towards the unknown, might lull you into dreams of endless trade and the glittering, exotic possibilities of the East. As the centuries roll by, and the initial fury of the Viking incursions gradually gives way to a complex tapestry of settlement, trade, and even nascent state-building, you, the once fearsome Viking, begin to sense a subtle yet undeniable shift in the very air you breathe. The age of relentless longship raids, of easy plunder, and of raw, untamed expansion is slowly, inexorably, drawing to a close. You are witnessing the gradual decline of the Viking Age, a quiet fading as new powers emerge, and the old, wild ways find themselves increasingly out of step with a changing world. Imagine standing on a familiar fjord back home in Scandinavia. The air still smells of salt and pine, but the clamor of shipyards preparing for vast raiding fleets is muted. Instead, you hear the steady thud, thud, thud of a blacksmith forging tools, not swords. The longships themselves, while still magnificent, are subtly changing. This is a unique, little-known detail as the Viking Age progressed. The design of longships began to evolve. While still capable of raiding, vessels increasingly became broader, deeper, and more suited for carrying cargo over long distances, reflecting a shift from pure warfare to more formalized trade. Your mighty warship is slowly becoming a slightly less aggressive merchant vessel, optimized for bulk goods rather than surprise attacks. It's like upgrading your custom-built battle wagon to a very large, practical cargo van. One of the most significant internal changes reshaping your world is the consolidation of power in Scandinavia itself. Instead of a patchwork of independent chieftains and small kingdoms, stronger, more centralized monarchies are beginning to emerge in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Kings like Harald Fairhair in Norway or Gorm the Old in Denmark are imposing their will, unifying disparate regions under single crowns. This means less tolerance for rogue warbands launching independent raids. A king needs control over his warriors, directing their energy towards state building, not random pillaging that might provoke a powerful Christian neighbor. Your freedom to just gather a few mates and go Viking whenever the mood struck is diminishing, replaced by the expectation of serving a larger, more structured kingdom. Hand in hand with this political consolidation comes the slow, pervasive spread of Christianity. You'd witness, perhaps grudgingly, the building of the first wooden churches, then sturdy stone cathedrals, their bells slowly beginning to chime across the landscape. The old pagan gods Odin, Thor, Freya, who once blessed your raids and sacrifices, are gradually losing their grip as Christian missionaries and powerful rulers embrace the new faith. This isn't just about belief. It changes laws, social structures, and ultimately, the very justification for raiding. Attacking a Christian monastery for gold becomes less appealing when your own king is a devout Christian, keen on good relations with Rome. It's like your favorite heavy metal band suddenly deciding to switch to gospel music. The energy is still there, but the message is fundamentally different. Concurrently, the external world, the lands you once terrorized, has learned to fight back. Remember those burrs from Alfred the Great, recall from Part 7? They become standard. European kingdoms, once fragmented and vulnerable, are now stronger, more organized, and better prepared. Kings like Otto Reuss in Germany or the Capetians in France are building more effective armies, developing better fortifications, and even, slowly, beginning to build their own naval forces. The easy pickings, the undefended monasteries and isolated villages are largely gone. Raiding becomes far riskier, yielding less profit and demanding more effort. It's like your favorite video game just introduced a massive difficulty upgrade, and now every level has boss fights and mandatory guard patrols. The lines between Viking and local are also blurring, in places like the Danelaw in England, in Normandy in France, and in Viking-founded towns in Ireland. Generations have passed. You'd see your fellow Norsemen, or their children and grandchildren, intermarrying with the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Irish. They're adopting local customs, learning new languages, and even converting to Christianity. Their identity shifts. They are no longer purely Viking in the old sense. They are Anglo-Danish, or Norman, or Hiberno-Norse. The wild spirit of the raider is being assimilated into the more settled, agrarian, and feudal societies they now inhabit. The academic debate often centers on whether the Viking Age truly ended, or if it simply evolved into new forms of Scandinavian influence, such as the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Was it a sharp decline, or a slow integration where the invaders became the integrated? The economy, too, played a significant role. The initial bursts of plunder gave way to established trade routes. As we saw in the East, furs, timber, and slaves are still valuable, but now they're exchanged for silver, silk, and spices through formal commerce rather than violent seizure. Towns like Dublin and Jorvik York flourish as legitimate trading centers. The profit margins from raiding, once high, dwindle as the risks increase and the opportunities for peaceful, sustained wealth grow. Why risk your life on a perilous raid when you can make a steady profit trading furs in a bustling market? It's a pragmatic shift, prioritizing long-term economic stability over short-term, high-risk gains. Your business model of smash and grab was no longer sustainable in a globalizing medieval economy. The symbolic end of the Viking Age in England is often marked by the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. You might hear tales of it. A brutal clash where King Harald Hardrada of Norway, one of the last great Viking warrior kings, met his ultimate defeat at the hands of the Anglo-Saxon King Harold Godwinson, just weeks before the Norman invasion. It was a final, desperate gasp of the old raiding spirit against a more unified, resilient England. And while the Norman conquest shortly after was led by descendants of Vikings, William the Conqueror's army, was fundamentally a feudal, Christian, Frankish-speaking force, not a horde of pagan raiders. So, as the longships become fewer, replaced by sturdier cogs for trade, and the shouts of battle give way to the murmuring of market squares and the chime of church bells, you witness the slow, inevitable transformation. The fierce, terrifying age of the Vikings isn't over with a bang, but with a quiet, gradual fading, as the world around them, and they themselves, adapt to a new, more settled reality. You drift off to sleep, perhaps with the faint, nostalgic taste of salt on your tongue, knowing that the wild, untamed spirit of the early Vikings still lingered, but mostly, it had found a new, quieter home. As the last echoes of the longship's oars fade from the rivers of Eastern Europe and the fortified burrs of England stand as testaments to a changed world, you, the silent observer of history, are left to contemplate the enduring, profoundly complex shadow cast by the Viking Age. It wasn't just a period of terror and destruction, it was an era of unprecedented exploration, strategic settlement, and profound cultural exchange that utterly reshaped medieval Europe. The awful truth wasn't just about their brutality, it was about the harsh, demanding reality of their lives, and the indelible, sometimes violent, mark they left on the very fabric of history. You've witnessed their terrifying arrival on unsuspecting shores, the chilling efficiency of their raids on vulnerable monasteries. You felt the raw fear they inspired, a primal dread that echoed through the chronicles of the time. The image of the fierce, axe-wielding barbarian, striking from the sea mist, is forever etched into the collective memory of Europe. This is the fear a very real, visceral response to a people who shattered existing norms of warfare and sanctity. But as you journeyed further, you saw them evolve. You experienced the grinding reality of their sea voyages, the harshness of their daily lives in newly settled lands, and the surprisingly intricate systems of law and governance they established. They were not just destroyers, they were pragmatic settlers, adapting to new environments and integrating with local populations. You observed them transforming from seasonal raiders into farmers, traders, and even nation builders, leaving behind permanent settlements and legal frameworks that would influence future societies. Your previous notion of them as mere pirates was, perhaps, a touch simplistic. Their reach was truly staggering, a testament to their unparalleled seamanship and fearless spirit. You followed their longships not just to England and Francia, but across the vast river systems of Eastern Europe, establishing trade routes that connected the Baltic to Byzantium and the Islamic Caliphate. You even sailed with them across the formidable North Atlantic, discovering Iceland, settling Greenland, and reaching the shores of North America, Vinland, long before Columbus. This is a common historical fact. Vikings reached North America specifically, L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada around 1000 AD, nearly 500 years before Columbus's voyage, a testament to their incredible navigational and exploratory prowess. Imagine being on that creaking longship, seeing truly new land for the first time. A discovery that would remain an undocumented footnote for centuries. The fascination they inspire comes from this duality: their spirit of adventure, their mastery of shipbuilding, their legal innovations like the weregild system you learned about, or the communal things, and their significant contributions to language. This is a unique, little-known detail, Old Norse. The language of the Vikings profoundly impacted the English language. Beyond obvious words like berserk, saga, and Viking itself, countless common words you use every day like sky, leg, anger, ugly, get, give, take, husband, law, and even they, them, their, have Old Norse origins. It's like their linguistic DNA is subtly woven into your very thoughts. They didn't just leave behind ruined monasteries. They left behind pieces of their language that you speak without even realizing it. The Viking Age didn't end with a sudden cataclysm, but with a gradual fading, a complex process of internal consolidation in Scandinavia, external resistance from stronger European kingdoms, and widespread assimilation. The wild, untamed spirit of the early raiders became increasingly constrained by the demands of settled life, organized religion, and feudal structures. The longship, once a symbol of terror, evolved into a vessel of trade. The battle axe sometimes gave way to the merchant's scale. Historians continue to debate the branding of Vikings. Were they primarily violent raiders, as contemporary Christian sources often depicted, and indeed, they were terrifyingly violent? Or were they more complex figures primarily driven by trade, exploration, and settlement, with raiding being one aspect of their opportunistic lifestyle? For you, having witnessed both the initial shock and the subsequent integration, the truth is clearly somewhere in the middle, a messy, brutal, yet undeniably transformative period of history. Their shadow is long, encompassing both the chilling whispers of fear and the awe-inspiring stories of human courage and ambition. As you drift away, the echoes of their longships on distant shores, the faint whispers of their sagas, and the lingering scent of wood smoke from their ancient camps become part of the night's quiet embrace.